As we've been discussing in this segment in the class about different cultures and societies, I have with me today Professor Shmuel Shepkaru. He's a professor of Judaic Studies and is a citizen of Israel. So thank you for joining me today, Professor Shepkaru.
Pleasure to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit, just give us some indications of perhaps how we can think about Israeli culture, perhaps some characteristics of Israeli culture?
Israeli culture has a lot in common with American culture, and Israelis love American culture, so they follow the same trends and they love the same music and the same movies. But at the same time, the culture is very different, and so they have a special sense of identity, and they see themselves as Israelis.
So can you perhaps clarify for us, as they see themselves as Israelis, Israel is a Jewish state. Could you make some distinctions for us in terms of how those two things come together, the Israeli nationality and the Jewish religion or ethnicity? How do these things come together, and how does that reflect itself in Israeli Jewish culture and society?
Most Israelis see themselves as secular Israelis, even though they practice most of the holidays. But they see themselves as secular Israelis, and they distinguish themselves from, let's say, the Orthodox Jews in Israel. And at the same time, they see themselves a little bit different from other Jews around the world, because of the circumstances and the environment and the experiences they go through. So they have a little bit a different sense of identity. So they do feel Jewish, but more than that, they feel Israelis.
So Israel is located in the region that we call generally the Middle East. Of course, Israel is surrounded by many countries that are somewhat like them and somewhat different. How can you make some comparisons between Israeli culture and the culture of its region? I mean, Israel itself is quite a diverse country. There are actually many different people from different backgrounds living within Israel, but how might Israeli culture, if you want to suggest that there is such a thing as Israeli culture that's distinct from its neighbors, how would you make those distinctions? Because they have some similarities too, right?
That's right. Israeli culture is really a mosaic of people from different places, different cultures that they bring together to Israel. So you can hear Russian, French, English, American English, and Arabic. And of course, Israelis are influenced by the society around them, the Arab culture. So you can listen to Arab music on radio. You can, and actually Israelis, the trend nowadays in Israel is to listen to Israeli music, but in an Arabic style. And the food, of course, Israelis think of, let's say, the hummus or the falafel. They think that's Israeli food. And of course, they eat the same food in the neighboring countries. So they take a lot from the cultures around them, and it's a nice fusion of different cultures that come together.
I think that's interesting that you should say fusion. That seems to be my impression too when I visited Israel. But you teach a course on Israeli film, or at least Israeli cultural through film.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about how you can learn about Israeli culture through film. What are some of the lessons that a student would learn in studying Israeli film?
So I always tell students when they watch the movies, pay attention to the story behind the story. Pay attention to how the people dress, what they eat, what kind of music they listen to, how they dance. And they realize that, well, sometimes they look like the neighbors around them, like the Arabs, and they dance like the Arabs. Sometimes they dance like the Russians who came to Israel in the beginning of the 20th century. So they realize that there are differences, and in certain areas in Israel, one culture maybe is more obvious than another. One language is more obvious. You hear one language over another. So it's interesting. It's really not a monolithic culture, and that's what makes it so different.
So could you tell us a little bit about the Hebrew language? Because this is what is particularly interesting, given that Hebrew is one of the primary languages spoken. It's the official language of Israel. But it's an old language, an ancient language that was then revived later on, and is actually fairly modern in its spoken form. Tell us a little bit about Hebrew, the language, and how it relates to Israeli culture and society.
That's an interesting point. Some have suggested recently to change the name of the language from Hebrew to Israeli. They think it's a specific type of Hebrew. I disagree. But a lot of biblical Hebrew and, of course, new words to accommodate the modern terms. But again, for example, slang and some of the curses are taken from the Arabic. So, and some of the words are taken from English, and they are given Hebrew suffix so sometimes when I go back, I really have to catch up with the slang because the slang changes so quickly, and the slang could be a word or a phrase from Arabic or English or a combination of the two. So it's a very interesting field to study, I think.
Very interesting and certainly complicated as well in some cases to kind of separate all these things out. I mean, as you said, kind of the language being perhaps very much like regular society, and that is a fusion of many different things kind of coming together in one place. So students, what do you think? Now that you've studied a little bit about Israeli culture, you've heard a little bit about it here today from Professor Shapkaru, tell us what you think about your perceptions of Israeli culture and society. Put your lenses on, see the world from an Israeli perspective. How would you see Israel's relations with the rest of the region and perhaps even with the United States? Let us know what you think.